Welcome to this funeral service for Dr. Joel Yager. A few things before we continue. If you have not yet silenced your cell phones, I would ask that you do so at this time. We welcome all who are here and physically those who are joining us online. We welcome you as well. I'm going to begin with the chanting of the 16th Psalm. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid, ki mimini ba'al emot, lachen samach libi, v'yagel kevodi av besari yishkon lavetach. Ki lo ta'azov nafshi lishol, lo titen chasidcha lerot shachat, todieni orach hayim. Sovas machot et panecha, ni'imot biyaminecha netzach. I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side. I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart exult and my soul rejoice. My being is secure. For you, O God, will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful one see destruction. You show me the path of life. Your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. Death has taken our beloved Dr. Joel Yager. And our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence, there's lamentation. In their tears, there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Be with them, O God. Hear them. For Joel's love that united us in life in which death cannot sever. For his companionship that we shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory. For his brilliance. For his compassion. For his caring, for his stupid jokes, for the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. And in this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scripture that brings us the ever new message of God's nearness. It tells of our kinship with the Creator in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. In the words of the 15th Psalm, we find Adonai miyagur bo halecha miyishkon b'har kodshecha, God, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain, those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless, but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may, do not retract, who do not exploit others, who never take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. And the words of the 23rd Psalm, which has brought so much comfort to so many over the ages, I'm going to chant them in the Hebrew, and many of you received them in the English. And I ask that when I read the English, if you could join with me. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binot deshe yarbitzeni al mei menuchot yenahaleni, nafshi yishovev. ינחני במעגלי צדק למען שמו, גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות לא ירא, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך משענתך המה ינחמוני, תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי, דישנת ושמן ראשי. כוסי רוויה, אך טוב החסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. Together, God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. An ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief in the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, and yet the centuries have taught us that the Keter Shem Tov, the crown of a good name, endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength and faith. And so with Job we say, Adonai Natan, God, you have given. You gave us a loved one, Joel Yager, who will not be forgotten. And for all that was good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai lakach, and God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust, before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and your love. As we say, Yishem Adonai mevorach me'ata v'ad olam, blessed is the name of God, now and forever. And finally, from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, we find Lakol zman va'et l'chol chefetz tachat hashamayim. For everything, there is a season. A time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down, a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones, a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time for tearing, a time for sowing, a time for silence, and a time for speaking. And friends, now is a time for silence. To hear in our hearts the music of a pure soul. To remember moments that were shared, moments of mentorship, of teaching, of partnership, of love, of family, of laughter, of difficulty. As we hold on to these memories of Joel. And that was also a time for sharing, for eulogy, for celebrating his remarkable life. And so we take a few moments now of silent prayer. Thank you. The family has asked that the following will be sharing tributes to Joel. First, Jonathan and Alison, and then a dear friend, Dr. Michael Gitlin, followed by the grandchildren. Jonathan.
Dad, I think you would appreciate that I'm sharing this story today. When Captain Joel Yager of the United States Army was sent to basic training near San Antonio, he met another Jewish psychiatrist from New York who was also in his group, and they became fast friends. Neither of them was particularly excited to be at boot camp, and they shared tricks of survival, such as asking their wives to sew maxi pads into the elbows of their uniforms before they had to crawl under barbed wire. At one point, my dad and his friend looked ahead at their schedule and saw a particularly long, arduous day approaching. Realizing that they had no desire to participate in difficult physical activity under the hot Texas sun, they went to their commanding officer and told him that in fact, they needed that specific day off in order to celebrate the upcoming Jewish holiday called Harkva, which they had just made up on the spot. Their Christian commander wanted to be respectful of his two Jewish doctors. And of course, this was before anyone could do a Google search to check the veracity of their claim. His friend's mom sent a cake from New York with the words Happy Harkva written on it as corroborating evidence. And their mission was accomplished. Day off granted. My dad was the kind of person who would always make the best out of situations, even basic training. He actually had a pretty simple mantra that he used to guide his life: to love, to learn, and to serve. Love, learn, serve. So I want to dive a little deeper into those. To love. My dad loved people and loved connecting deeply with people, especially his family. He and my mom just celebrated their 60th anniversary, and the biggest joy of his life was spending time with his wife, his kids and our spouses, and his 7 grandchildren. He also loved his friends, his colleagues, his countless students and residents, and his patients. He gave so much love to people, it was almost as if they had no choice but to love him back. In the past few weeks, we've been reading him well-wishing emails sent by friends and colleagues, some of whom he's known for 50 years. And these messages routinely gush praise, gratitude, appreciation, and love. And after a while, we had to ask him, Dad, how much did you pay these people to write this stuff? He loved very deeply and was loved very deeply in return. And he gave incredible hugs, the kind that made you literally feel just how much he loved you. To love. To learn. Wow, did my dad learn a lot in his life. He knew so much information about such a wide range of topics, not just his chosen field of psychiatry. He was always reading nonfiction books in many different areas simply because he wanted to know more about the world and have a better understanding of it. He was an incredibly creative thinker, and he had the absolute gift of teaching. My dad was the educator's educator, the teacher of teachers. His students went on to become the next generation of leading teachers, who in turn educated the next generation. Between this and all of his writing and publishing, his legacy of learning and education is truly amazing. Dad received 5 Lifetime Achievement Awards from various academic associations within psychiatry, and his biggest pride was in teaching. And unfortunately, for the past few years, he also taught us how to navigate a horrible illness with humor, with optimism, and with grace. To learn. To serve. Every day, he and my mom would request from the universe, may I be allowed to be of service today. In one form or another, Dad has asked everyone he knows, what can I do to help you? And he asked this with a genuine desire to serve, from little things like running to the grocery store, to big things like major life counseling. Dad mentored countless students, residents, and colleagues, and happily gave of his time, his efforts, and his attention. This was very meaningful for him. He truly gave from his heart. To love, to learn, and to serve. And to that, I would add one other guiding principle by which he lived his life, and that is to laugh. Everyone who knew my dad knows that he had an amazing sense of humor. When he was residency training director, he tried his hand as a stand-up comedian every year, roasting the graduating residents. And honestly, some of the time he was pretty funny. Memories of him belly laughing with tears rolling down his cheeks because of something he saw in a stupid movie or from some good joke that he heard are absolutely priceless and make me smile every time I think of them. He loved to laugh, and he loved to make people laugh. One of the greatest lessons that my parents taught me is not to take myself too seriously. My dad modeled this all the time. At the end of their 50th anniversary party, Dad got up to give a speech with, of course, a PowerPoint presentation. He asked two of his grandsons, Ethan and Eyal, who were then 8 years old at the time, to come up and help him read the slides. They had no idea what they were getting into and thought they were helping him with a serious project. Pretty soon, he had them reading to the crowd his life lessons, including, of course, that one should never underestimate the power of a good fart joke. Watching the two kids crack up on stage just amplified the happiness in the room. He was really a master at this. Last year, he published a paper called "And Then He Died," in which he described teaching a seminar about historical figures in psychiatry, where after discussing each person, his students mischievously added the phrase, "and then he died." He went on to write about his own thoughts and feelings with regard to dying, as a then 81-year-old with cancer, and how he described how people often see an ideal death as, quote, free from physical pain, dignified, lucid, graceful, attended by loved ones, having passed on the wisdom of the tribe, and anticipating a positive obituary. He then lamented that most people don't get that kind of death. Last weekend, when we knew he was close to the end of his life, my family all flew out from the East Coast, and with my mom, Alison and Kesh, Naama, all 7 grandchildren, and me sitting in his room, Dad perked up and rallied in bed and gave us 30 minutes of energy, attention, and wisdom. Cracking jokes and teaching life lessons over his choice of bagels and lox, he told the kids his thoughts and advice with regard to picking life partners, finding your path with regard to career choices, having a family, exploring spirituality, and maintaining meaningful connections with other people. Everyone got up, hugged him, kissed him, and said goodbye. It was truly one of the most beautiful, memorable, meaningful, and tearful moments of my life. Dad, you were an incredible human being. I can't thank you enough for everything you taught me and modeled for me, and for how much you made the world a better place by being here. I'm going to miss you so incredibly much. And at the same time, I also feel so good knowing how much the world can and will celebrate you. Love you.
I'm going to attempt my best to get through this, but my lovely husband has agreed to be my emotional support animal and my backup. Come forward. How do I even begin to encapsulate the light energy and pure vitality of my dad, Joel Yager? It's impossible to do him justice. In truth, he was the sweetest, most generous, loving, supportive, and genuinely nice person I have ever known. When we were teaching my husband Kesh the meaning of the Yiddish word mensch, which roughly means a lovely person, we used my dad as a perfect example. His ability to connect with anyone and everyone and to get every stranger's life story within 2 minutes or less was truly uncanny. The unbelievable outpouring of messages from people he inspired, mentored, taught, and guided throughout his career has left me in awe of the giant ripple effect of my dad. He has touched so very many lives. He was also incredibly goofy. He loved grocery shopping and Costco to a bizarre extent. He loved tinkering in the kitchen and making culinary concoctions, blending ingredients like wasabi, peanut butter, and sardines in one sandwich, which he would relish and offer to my horrified mother. He adored my mother more than anything and would shower her with chocolate constantly just to see her happy. He loved to laugh. He had the best laugh. When he was laughing really hard, he would just silently heave with tears of joy in his eyes and little squeaking noises. It was great to watch. He was a brilliant musician and filled our house with music from the time I can remember. His musical abilities were incredible, and I have many memories of him playing old show tunes while my grandma Marge stood at the piano and sang. Music was so important in our family that when my dad first met my future husband, he optimistically tested him for perfect pitch. When my poor tone-deaf husband failed miserably, my crestfallen dad sadly closed the piano and said, "That's okay, I think we're done here." Despite this, he still welcomed Kesh into the family with open arms and love and treated him like a son. That was one of my dad's superpowers. No matter who he was speaking to, he always made that person feel listened to, valued, and loved. He would always keep an index card in his pocket, and when something funny or ridiculous happened, he would often write it down and say, "That's going in my movie." He loved making others laugh, or at least attempting to. Of all his hundreds of academic accomplishments, he was probably most proud of his joke list, which clogged all of our email accounts with huge amounts of variably funny jokes on a daily basis. When Gmail started blocking him because the algorithm thought he was sending spam to so many people at one time, he broke his recipient list down into smaller groups just so that he could keep sending out the jokes. In fact, my dad said he really didn't care where he was buried as long as it had good Wi-Fi. It's a true story. Like many of us, I still have guilt about deleting 99% of them without reading the joke. He simply loved to feel and to share joy. He was basically a big huggable teddy bear. His eyes always twinkled, and he lit up the room when he entered. And when he left, he would always hug and kiss us and say, "I love you, I love you, I love you," and often, "God bless you." And we knew he meant it. He was a teacher and educator like no other. The brilliance and wisdom just seemed to pour out of him. He was like a Yiddish Yoda. As an educator to the core, he was still trying to teach even in his role as a patient. 6 weeks ago, he developed unusual symptoms, which turned out to be a very rare presentation of recurrent cancer, and which stumped many teams of highly intelligent doctors at multiple hospitals. Lying in his hospital bed, he would say that as a lifelong medical educator, he was just doing his job to challenge and push them to think outside the box. He literally signed a consent form for someone on the team to write him up as a case report, with the caveat, of course, that he be a co-author. That's a true story. He was always such an incredible trooper and handled the last 3 years of his cancer diagnosis with his typical gallows humor, total fortitude, and humility. In the hospital, in true Joel fashion, he conducted not one but 2 life reviews and came up with the same conclusion both times, that he had no regrets. He had achieved all of his life goals, and we can certainly all take comfort in that. All 7 grandchildren really knew him, and he really knew each of them, and we are so thankful for such a blessing. I cannot even begin to express my gratitude for all the gifts my amazing dad gave to me and to so many others. I am so happy for the time we got to spend with him. As one of my dad's old friends summed it up, "You did good, Joel Yager." I think he would be totally verklempt listening to these eulogies, but he would have loved them. We love you so much, and we will miss you immensely. Thank you.
Well, at least my name is Michael Gitlin. I am honored to be the only non-Yager up here, I guess. And I can tell you the perspective, being a non-Yager, is alarmingly similar to the perspective of the Yagers. So I'm a former student of one of those, former mentee of, then colleague, and then close friend of Joel's. I've known Joel for 49 plus years, since he interviewed me for the residency at UCLA. He was the residency director, and I was applying to the program. As a Bronx Jew who had moved to the West Coast, he resonated with me and made me feel so welcome as a Brooklyn Jew who was wondering whether it was really worth migrating 3,000 miles. He did accept me into the program. I did go. He supervised me, and characteristic, of course, of Joel and Eileen. He invited me into his life and invited me for Thanksgiving with the Yager clan when I knew no one else in Los Angeles. When he and Eileen still lived in LA, they left in '95, and after Jani, my wife of 40 plus years, got together and she knew them, two older kids were friends with Alison and Jonathan, they all grew up together, we would spend all of our important times, Thanksgivings, Jewish high holidays together. They were our chosen family. After they abandoned us, they moved in 1995 to New Mexico. We've still gotten together for simchot, such as weddings and bar and bat mitzvahs of the families, children and grandchildren. But as I left a message for Joel and Eileen a few months ago, Jani and I have never forgiven them for leaving us. I think we all know that eulogies tend to be just that, eulogies, magnanimous visions of a person in which even axe murderers sound like Nelson Mandela or Albert Schweitzer or something like that. Not so with Joel. As per what Jonathan and Alison said, he was the best person I've ever known. And the most talented person I've ever known. And he changed my life. And he made me a better person. In a world of smart people, he stood out even there. As his kids just said, he read everything, he knew everything. Even within the last year, as he struggled with the side effects of his chemotherapy, as the kids said, he continued to write papers, but now they were different papers. They were papers of deep existential wisdom about aging, about coping with a potentially lethal illness. In many ways, I've spent my life, my professional life, trying unsuccessfully to catch up to Joel, which of course is simply not possible. And as an example of his love of knowledge and enthusiasm of all things psychiatric, when I was a student, if you were one of Joel's students, as I was 40-something years ago, you'd start to present a case, as they say. I saw a 50-year-old woman who, and Joel would interrupt and quote the last 10 studies on 50-year-old women that he had read, and 3 studies we might actually do on 50-year-old women. For some of my fellow students, Joel's knowledge, enthusiasm for knowledge were overwhelming and made them cringe. For me, they were intoxicating. Without him, without his infectious love of our field of knowledge for its own sake, I would never have gone into academic psychiatry, which I did and I've loved. But as his children just said, he wasn't just brilliant. He was unimaginably warm. If you were in need, no one was there for you like Joel. With his bear hugs, his warmth, his empathy, he and Eileen took care of all of us. He knew everyone. He was friends with, no, not everyone, almost everyone. There were a few psychoanalysts he really didn't like. And many of us could only admire, and maybe with some envy, maybe not maybe, his loving relationships with Eileen, his wife of 60 years, Alison, Jonathan, and his 7 grandchildren. How did Joel have the time and the emotional energy to be a world-class psychiatrist and professor, and also to be such a loving family member with endless devotion to them all? Some things are just mysteries. Okay, he wasn't perfect. He didn't know shit about sports, as an example, which was one of the real rifts in my relationship with him. Furthermore, his endless cheeriness was sometimes overwhelming. Even when Joel was miserable, he was cheerful. You asked Joel how he was, and you had only 2 possible responses: wonderful or fantastic. Even when he was unhappy, he was that way. As Alison described him once to me, Joel, she said, was delusionally happy. What a gift. We need to acknowledge, as his children have, his love of jokes. Now, in contrast to many other people who makes lots of jokes, I agree, Joel was actually funny, which is not true about everybody who makes a lot of jokes. And many of you, as has been mentioned, were on Joel's joke lines. I'm so pleased to know that I wasn't the only one who deleted 99% of them. He would send out jokes by the dozens, by the scores, by the hundreds. Most of them, really, if you read them, really weren't that funny. As Joel acknowledged, they were, as they're now called, dad jokes, corny, old. And some of them were, shall we say, not quite in tune with today's modern sensibilities. I was trying to think of a good way to phrase that one. But Joel was like a Marx Brothers movie, for those of you who have actually seen Marx Brothers movies, in which most of the jokes are not that funny, but after you're bombarded relentlessly by them, you would laugh out of sheer exhaustion. Joel, the gift of your friendship was immeasurable. You shaped many of us, and specifically me, all for the better, to become the best person, at least that I could be. My gratitude to you is immense. The world is a smaller and dimmer place without you. I love you, and I'll miss you till the end of my days. Rest in peace, brother.
I want to invite the grandkids to come on up and Adin to share some thoughts.
We're going to keep this really brief. All right, so I'll be speaking on behalf of all 7 grandchildren. And I think we all thought that our grandpa was our ultimate role model. There are many people who we all have looked up to throughout our lives, but as I'm sure all of you know, there was something pretty special about Grandpa. He was probably the most genuine, selfless person any of us have ever known. He was never concerned about himself. What brought our grandpa joy wasn't material, it wasn't personal interest. What brought him joy was his family, and the prosperity of those around him. Our grandpa showed us just how much better life is when you do the right things with the right people, and he showed us a way of finding happiness. He was a great man, and he was rewarded for it. He was rewarded through his incredible wife, through his amazing children, and of course, us, his excellent, brilliant grandchildren. He was rewarded through his career, his friends, his creativity, and he never took it for granted. He was always smiling, always telling an awful but still usually funny joke. So today is a celebration of the complete, fulfilling life our grandpa led. So, from the grandchildren, we love you, Grandpa. We will always try to emulate you, to do our best to do the right things, to make Thanksgiving dinner smoothies, which for those of you who don't know, that is turkey, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, stuffing, and yams in a blender. He would actually drink this, and he did actually do this. We will always try to keep family close, to of course drink grandpa tea, to stay laughing, and last but certainly not least, go to Costco.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan and Alison and Michael and grandchildren. Such beautiful tributes to a remarkable man. Allow me just to fill in a few blanks of Joel's history. Dear Eileen, dear Jonathan and Naama, dear Alison and Alkesh, dear Adin, Noah, Eyal, and Sivan, Gabriel, Ethan, and Isabella, dear Karen, joining us online from New York, dear Emily, dear Tamara, dear family and friends all. In the Mishnah, which is the oldest rabbinic book of writings, in Tractate Pirkei Avot, chapter 4, verse 1, we found the following phrase that many of us may know. Ezehu chacham halomed mikol adam, ezehu ashir hasameach bechelko, ezehu mechubad hamechabed et habriot. Who is wise? The one who learns from everyone. Who is rich? The one who is satisfied with what he has. Who is honored? The one who honors everyone. As we have heard so beautifully from his children, longtime colleague and dear friend and grandchildren, Joel Yager was a remarkable human being. We know this. He was brilliant, loving, affectionate. He was irreverent, tolerant, and generous, giving of his time, his expertise, compassion, and resources to countless students, patients, colleagues, family members, and friends. You know, today is the first day of the festival of Hanukkah, and this is a time of year when it is dark and cold. The light of the Chanukiah, the Hanukkah menorah, reminds us of the power of light to dispel the shadows and darkness of the world around us. In so many ways, Joel Yager served as a Chanukiah to countless individuals and organizations. His ebullience and positivity, his warmth and friendship, his brilliance, his music, and unbridled joy about the miracles of life, and this is a time of miracles, enhanced our world. He was born in 1941 in the Bronx. His parents, Eddie and Natalie Yager, raised Joel and his sister Karen in a home that was filled with family, tradition, and love. His father, Eddie, was in the U.S. Customs Service. His mother, Natalie, was a teacher and a librarian and a volunteer in Hadassah and many other Jewish organizations. The whole family lived in a one-bedroom apartment. He and his sister had a cupboard, lived in a cupboard off the kitchen that was big enough for a bed and bookcase, that all that he and his sister needed. They each had their own little cubby. He attended the High School of Music and Art, studying jazz piano and French horn. Quoting Joel, he was bookish, musical, chubby, and not very athletic. He played the piano from the time he was 6 years old. No surprise to any of us here, he had many, many friends. When he was 15 years old, he started his first band. He played weddings, bar mitzvahs, and gigs in the Catskills. He went to yeshiva, to Orthodox religious school, through 6th grade until he asked so many questions they couldn't answer that they got rid of him, much to his strict grandfather's dismay. He rebelled in junior high school. Finally, they sent him to public school. Like so many other of that generation, the whole family summered in bungalows in the Catskills, and it was a very, very close family. Sisters and cousins, everyone lived near and with each other. He went to City College of New York, living at home. Started out first as an engineer. Didn't like that. Then he was a music major. Didn't like that. And then he found his calling in pre-med, and he got the Jonas Salk Scholarship to medical school, full ride. And when in med school, he tried different specialties, gastroenterology, that might be the fart jokes you were talking about, I don't know. Neurology, but he found his calling in psychiatry, as we know. And Joel's life was irreparably changed when he met a beautiful and brilliant medical student named Eileen Danes. There were 10 women in their class, and Joel was a year ahead of Eileen. I'm told they met in the dorm, and her room was right above his. Now, Joel was not a morning person when he was in med school. His alarm would go off at 6 a.m., and then a second alarm clock would go off at 6 a.m., and then he had a deal where someone would bang on his door and say, "Yager, wake up, you got to get to class." But he also woke up Eileen, who lived above him. And she was not happy about this, and she wanted to know who the person was who annoyed her so much. Turned out that his resident was a distant cousin of Eileen's who introduced them. And it was a auspicious day in 1962, the day that President Kennedy announced the Bay of Pigs. And they sat down to watch it in a common space in the dormitory, and they started talking. And they talked so much that they annoyed the people around them, and they kicked them out of the room. But they kept on talking for 4 hours straight. But he didn't ask her out for a long time. He was busy. Finally, he asked her out. And the very first thing he said to Eileen on their first date was, "I just want you to know that I'm not getting married until I'm 27 or finish with my residency, whichever comes later." He was 21 at the time. They were married a year and a half later. On October 8th, 1964, 60 years ago at the Concourse Plaza Hotel. It was a small wedding, and they went on their honeymoon to Amish country in Pennsylvania. Just leave it at that. Their first apartment was on Pelham Parkway. It was a 5-minute walk to the hospital. And they both did their residencies at Albert Einstein. Eileen, of course, in pediatrics, and Joel in internal medicine and psychiatry. And in 69 through 71, Joel was in the Army Medical Corps. He was a psychiatrist. He was lucky to get his training in psychiatry in Fort Ord, California. And he got out as a major. Jonathan came along in 1970 in Monterey at Fort Ord. And Eileen was working part-time in pediatrics, and then UC San Diego, of course, on the psychiatry faculty. Alison was born in 1973 in La Jolla. And again, Eileen was working part-time in pediatrics. In 1973, he was recruited to direct the psychiatry residency program at UCLA. He was very young to be the head of that program. He was there for 22 years, through 1973 to 1996, and Eileen again taught in pediatrics. And they both, of course, saw patients as well. Eileen, your and Joel's marriage worked, as you told me, because you never shut things out. You both talked a lot, which doesn't surprise any of us, knowing you. But they didn't take themselves too seriously also. They laughed all the time. They weren't afraid to be silly, and they were always available to others. Their home was a center of art, of culture, of support, of love, and of laughter. And they were so loyal and so devoted to one another. Everyone in his life, he was devoted, as we've heard so beautifully. He cared about people deeply. In Los Angeles, their home was filled with music, and they had a beautiful community. They belonged to Stephen Weiss congregation. Eileen, you studied with Rabbi Hersher there, and Jonathan Omerman. And they had so many friends. In 1994, they left Los Angeles due to the Northridge earthquake. And they looked around and they saw an ad for a senior psychiatric educator at the University of New Mexico. And they called the director of that program Sam Keith. This is where I come into the story, because I served as rabbi in Albuquerque, New Mexico for 14 years. So I've known the Yagers for the past 29 years. And Sam, when he heard that Joel Yager, who was coming to New Mexico, he offered him a job on the spot, and Eileen as well. And Eileen's mom, Margaret Danes, moved with them. And they were in Albuquerque for 13 years. And there Joel truly established his reputation and received national and international psychiatric association awards and conferences. And he became an expert on eating disorders and medical education. And the awards that he received are really too countless to enumerate. They flew all over to teach and go to meetings. Joel and Eileen got involved in our congregation in New Mexico, Congregation Albert. Eileen and a dear friend, Paula Schwartz, did meditation together every Shabbat morning at our synagogue. Kids got married, and most of the grandkids were born when they were in Albuquerque. And they had a beautiful home in the Heights so they could have space for their children and their grandchildren to come and visit. They had many friends in New Mexico, in the medical community, in the Sufi community, in the music community. Their home was a salon, a place where people would gather to share culture and learn music, scholarship, artists, doctors. The conversation around the table was filled with laughter, with joy, with love and learning. And in 2008, they moved here to Denver, and they both got positions at University of Colorado at Anschutz, teaching and mentoring. And again, Joel continued his work with eating disorders. And continuing their traditions, they had music nights in their home. Every 2 months, students and residents and faculty who were musicians, everyone came and everyone had to perform something. And Joel was so good and welcoming and supportive. until, of course, COVID came along. He wrote all the time. He wrote over 300 articles. Joel loved being a grandfather. He loved being a father. He was so proud of all of you. And to his daughter-in-law and his son-in-law, you were his children. He welcomed you with open arms and love into his life. 3 years ago, of course, as we've heard, he was diagnosed with cancer, very rare cancer, of course. There's nothing ordinary about Joel Yager. It had to be a rare cancer. He got excellent care at the Rocky Mountain Cancer Center here, with an extensive program of treatment. And he was cancer-free for 15 months, and then the recurrence came. 35 days ago, he was fine. 34 days ago, he wasn't. And as we've heard so beautifully, that last meeting with all the grandchildren and children around him, the laughter, the tears, the advice, the bad jokes. And after everyone left, after you celebrated your 60th anniversary, Joel told Eileen that it was time. He was ready. And he was. He had a blessed life. A life that made a huge impact on so many, those who are here, those who are not here. But his energy, his teaching, his love reverberates in so many hearts. There's a story that's told of a Hasidic rabbi who was very old and who was ready to die. And one day he was standing at his window looking out at the town square in front of him, and he watched as his followers just sort of passed by his house, and suddenly he called out to one of them. He says, Avram, come here at once. The surprised Chassid, this religious Jew, had never been called to his teacher home, but he entered full of anxiety and trepidation and said, "What is it, my teacher, my rabbi?" "Avram," said the rabbi, "look outside this window. Tell me what you see." "I see nothing," said Avram, "only streets and people and the usual goings-on around town." "You may go," said the rabbi with sadness, and then he resumed his place by the window, and one by one he called his followers and asked the same question. "What do you see?" And they described the people, the buildings, the business transactions which occurred outside the window. And the rabbi got increasingly agitated, and finally he called on a young woman. He said, "What do you see?" And she said, "I see creatures created in God's image, carrying out God's work." At this answer, the Rebbe smiled and closed his eyes, content that his message would be carried on to the next generation. Dr. Joel Yager was a man who possessed the gift of being able to view the world and see beauty, possibility, goodness, and holiness wherever he looked. And it is this gift that he has bequeathed to all of us here today who knew and loved him. At this time of Chanukah, at this time of dedication, of light in the midst of darkness, we give thanks for his life, his boundless love, his friendship, brilliance, and his perseverance. They all serve as a true testimony to a unique and a pure soul. And so we say, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be for an eternal blessing. And let us say, Amen. I want to call Tamara to come up and help us lead the El Maleh Rachamim. I'm going to ask everyone to please rise as you are able. Okay.
El Maleh Rachamim, Shochen Bamrohim, Ametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'ma'alot Kedoshim U'Tahorim, Kezohar Rakia, Mazhirim, את נשמת יוסף בן אברהם ונחמה שהלך לעולמו. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו, לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו. ונאמר
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Yosef ben Avraham v'Nechama, to Dr. Joel Yager, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. Friends, the family has asked that I let you know that following internment at Emanuel Cemetery, you can come and pay Shiva and condolence calls at the home of Eileen and Joel Yager, 1510 East 10th Avenue, number 2W in Denver. Today from 2 to 4 p.m., and then from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. There will be a Shiva service at 7 o'clock p.m. tonight. And then Friday from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. and Sunday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m.
And all of that information is in your handouts, and if you didn't get a handout, we have printed some more, and they're on the table if you'd like that information. Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude our service here at Temple Emanuel. We will have interment at Emanuel Cemetery, as the rabbi mentioned. We do not have an escorted procession today to the cemetery. However, everyone is still invited, and we're also going to invite you to make your way to the cemetery on your own. In those handouts are directions to the cemetery. You are welcome to follow the hearse and the family cars. However, just like we will be, you need to follow all traffic laws. So no running through red lights or stop signs. We will ask you to remain in your places as we escort the family and casket out to their cars. And we are going to ask you to please refrain from trying to express your condolences at this time. It will delay the family getting to the burial. If you run into them in the restroom or in the foyer, allow them to do what they need to do. And they have been instructed to do the same. So if they blow you off, that was because of me. If I can invite the pallbearers forward at this time.